Shotguns are pretty cool. You probably already think that if you equip this thing, especially since it's not quite as flashy as its cousin. And has less of a gimmick than NG's other primaries. But this is a simple, reliable, working man's gun. And you might have already developed a taste for that.
Heck yeah!
Really, almost all video game shotguns since 1994 can be put on the shotgun to super shotgun spectrum. These two are no exception, as the boomstick is to the super shotgun, the Warthog is to the combat shotgun. Since DRG lets you change weapons pretty drastically with mods and overclocks, it's definitely not a hard rule, but usually NG's primaries are more like personal defense weapons, while his secondaries are the ones you pull out when you want to kill a lot of bugs, a really big bug, or both. The Hog fills that personal defense weapon role in a really straightforward way, efficiently cleaning up regular bugs that get near you in 1 or 2 shots. Warthog's spread doesn't have anything crazy going on. It's not like the boomstick where pellets just sometimes fly way outside of the reticle. Although they do sometimes go a little bit outside of it. The spread is wider than it is tall, just like it looks, and it's no coincidence that it fits snugly around a grunt's mouth. The game absolutely wants you to pop these guys in the face. But before talking about damage, let's take a little detour down here to the Tier 4 mods. This is not a balanced mod tier. The +1 damage per pellet is way better than the armor break mod. The armor break isn't bugged, it's just heavily outcompeted. Against heavy armor, you either want to avoid shooting the armor in the first place, or just use a different tool completely. Or both. And against light armor, it's pretty bad numerically. That +1 damage mod is almost +15% damage, and the damage penalty from hitting light armor is -20% damage. So an armor break pellet hitting and breaking a light armor plate does 7 damage. Compared to a +1 damage pellet doing 6.4. In other words, just 0.6 more damage per pellet. That's not a very good trade considering you normally aim this thing at the unarmored mouths of bugs that are running straight at you. But it gets worse, because of how shotguns interact with armor in this game. Just a quick aside if you don't know how armor break works in DRG, there's a couple typical kinds of armor. You have armor that blocks 100% of damage, like Praetorian plates. It's usually called heavy armor, and each armor plate has its own health value, and breaks when that health is reduced to 0. Then you have light armor that reduces damage by 20%, or 50% for small rollers. These plates don't have HP, instead they have a random percentage chance to break, based on the amount of armor damage you inflict them. You can visit the wiki to see that, or just pause the video right here. With an armor break mod equipped, your armor break multiplier goes up, which means you can break heavy armor faster and light armor more consistently. Some weapons will reach 100% armor break versus a grunt's light armor. Also, with an armor break mod equipped, you get something I call armor punch through, where the shot that breaks armor does full damage as if the armor was already broken. But shotguns work a bit unintuitively. Even though they're hit-scan weapons where all the pellets connect at the same time, the pellets each calculate armor break individually, one after another. Because of this, you never actually reach a 100% armor break chance against light armor. Like how taking a 50% chance of success twice does not add up to 100%. In this example, all of my pellets hit with both shots, but each time, some of it was resisted. This first shot hit 3 plates along the grunt's side and broke all of them, but 3 pellets had their damage reduced, resulting in this damage number on Has 5. This already makes the 2-shot impossible. And even though the second shot was aimed at the already broken plates, one of the pellets instead hit a leg and failed to break that plate. Not that it matters, because the 2-shot was already impossible. This also means that, without the armor break mod, if one of the pellets breaks a plate, any subsequent pellets from that same shot won't have their damage reduced by that armor. So, some of the shot's damage gets to ignore the 20% penalty. That's why these 2 damage numbers are different despite both having the same mod setup and hitting the same plate. In other words, shotguns sort of innately have a weaker version of the armor punch-through effect that is normally exclusive to armor break mods, which further devalues the Tier 4 armor break mod. Now, I've gone pretty deep down the rabbit hole of Warthog armor break calculations, despite how much of a pain they are due to each pellet having its own separate break chance, creating many different outcomes. Here's some probability trees I made when looking into the odds of failing to 2-shot a grunt with body shots when you have armor break equipped. You can ignore all that though. The end result is that with either mod equipped, you usually 2-shot grunts if at least 8 pellets connect. The armor break mod doesn't actually perform any better than the damage mod in this context, and the damage mod is a lot better when shooting at weak points. From this point on, I'll be pretending that the Warthog has 8 base damage instead of 7. The next thing to mention before weapon mods is that the Warthog has a really good reload cancel. This is because while it has a sort of slow reload animation, your ammo count updates pretty early in that animation, so you can then hit terrain scanner or melee to cancel almost half of it. A well-timed reload cancel on this gun reduces the reload time from 2 seconds at base to roughly 1.3 seconds, or 65% of the normal duration, though this will vary based on your timing. If you equip Cycle Overload, which makes the reload slower, the cancel gets better, reducing the reload time to about 58% of the normal duration. Even with the fastest possible reload speed, you still save a bit of time reload cancelling on this gun. That's not true for all weapons, by the way. For instance, on the Zukovs, reload cancelling can wind up slower than a normal reload. The great reload cancel that the Warthog has does improve its sustained firepower, but also it affects the balance of its mods. So, Tier 1 mods. +1 fire rate or +2 mag size. This one is also something of a no-brainer. +1 rate of fire is a 50% increase from base, and the bigger mag is a bit devalued due to that good reload cancel. You should pretty much always take rate of fire here. There's exactly one build I sometimes run that doesn't take this, with one specific overclock, and even then I don't think it's optimal. Tier 2 is the tier with the most competitive options. Frankly, all of these mods are strong. Option 1 is +42 max ammo. This is very simply a lot of extra ammo and total damage. Option 2 is +2 pellets. On paper, a nice +25% damage per shot, which is already pretty good, but really it's better than that because firing a larger number of pellets makes your damage more consistent on top of giving you better DPS against bigger targets. And then option 3, the choke, gives a 50% reduction in base spread. This is a pretty strong accuracy mod, but the competition here is fierce, and I wouldn't normally recommend this one. I should say right now that this is a reduction to base spread. That means it doesn't reduce the accuracy penalties that come from moving or sprinting, which are 2 and 8 respectively. For this gun, the base vertical spread value is 6 and the base horizontal spread value is 12. As a result, when standing still, choke does reduce your spread by 50%. When moving, choke reduces your spread to 57.14% horizontally and 62.5% vertically. And when sprinting, choke reduces your spread to 70% horizontally and 78.57% vertically. The sprinting modifiers matter the least because it only applies to the first shot out of a sprint, since shooting will cancel your sprint. Rather than saying that this mod cuts spread in half, it's more accurate to say that this mod reduces spread by roughly 50% if you're standing still, 40% if you're moving, and 25% if you're sprinting. More significantly, it's overall beaten out by loaded shells. A more accurate shotgun is good, but accuracy by volume is in this case generally better. Both of these mods will increase your effective range, and while choke increases it somewhat more, it's not by a huge margin, and unlike loaded shells, it doesn't make you better at killing stuff up close. So ammo and loaded shells wind up pretty close in usefulness. Though you do have to be more mindful of your ammo use with loaded shells, that's a good lesson to learn on NG in general anyways, and you'll still be fine in terms of ammo economy if you're using your other tools effectively. NG has a lot of damage sources after all, and there are diminishing returns to ammo efficiency. That said, on a Warthog without overclocks, I would rank the ammo mod slightly higher than loaded shells. That doesn't mean nothing either coming from me, since I'm the kind of player who has a bias towards damage over ammo. It's just a whole lot of extra shells. On some overclocks, my opinion is flipped, we'll get to that later. Tier 3 mods are less powerful than the ones in Tier 2, and it's not hugely important which one you take. There's a 60% recoil reduction, minus 0.5 seconds of reload time, or plus 2 mag size. The reload speed is pretty weak due to the gun's reload cancel, as is the plus 2 mag, while less recoil on Warthog is mostly just for convenience. I do consider plus 2 mag size the overall best here, but it doesn't matter that much regardless. Warthog has always had 8 base damage and Tier 4 doesn't exist, so that takes us to Tier 5. This is a bit of a weird one, because one of these options is a lot more powerful than the other, but even so, both are kind of equal choices for playstyle reasons. Turret Whip's description tells you almost nothing, so here's some stats. With this mod, shooting a turret causes them to consume 5 turret ammo and fire an explosive projectile at whatever the turret was pointing at. It travels at 75 meters per second, and explodes for a whopping 160 explosive damage in a 2 meter radius. The explosion has a 1.5 meter minimum damage radius, past which it scales down to 50% damage at the very edge of that 2 meter radius. It also has a 100% chance to stun for 1.5 seconds, and 1.0 fear power like most explosives, which means a 50% chance to scare common enemies. It has a cooldown of 3 seconds, during which your turrets will smoke until they're ready to be whipped again. Whipping them does not stop or slow down their normal firing pattern, and you can use Turret Whip on a different NG's turrets. Only a single pellet from your gun needs to hit the turret for this to happen. So, long story short, this is really good. It's strong and highly ammo-efficient splash damage against groups of bugs, and also good single-target damage against everything that doesn't resist explosive. The 160 damage that Turret Whip does is double the raw damage of a Warthog meat shot, and that's if you're taking loaded shells. Plus, it inflicts stun and fear. Poor Praetorians don't resist explosive and can be stunned and scared, so Turret Whip kills them pretty quickly, cheaply, and also prevents them from attacking. It squashes Mactera well too. Most of them take double damage from explosions, and they have no fear resist, so they always get scared. An NG at a choke point can wipe most or all of a swarm using just Turret Whip, leaving him with much more secondary ammo and grenades. Minor Adjustments, on the other hand, is much more modest. It makes the Warthog automatic, which is essentially just a quality of life improvement, and it gives it plus 0.5 rate of fire. Assuming you took the Tier 1 rate of fire mod like a good dwarf, that's a 16.6% rate of fire increase, which isn't very impressive, but it's alright. Strictly speaking, this is quite a bit weaker than Turret Whip, But you have to account for how some players just aren't going to want to hang around feeding their sentries for prolonged periods of time. I mean, obviously if you find a mod more fun, that's going to make it your #1 pick in general, but that's doubly true when talking about something like turrets. Some players love them, others just want to run around and shotgun things. So even with the golf and power in mind, it's hard not to say that there's a place for both of these mods. And since it's relevant here, let's cover turrets quickly. So the #1 thing to understand about turrets is that defender system is insane. +5 damage is huge and easily gets you more value than Hawkeye system does, even if you're a turret whip diehard. Part of that is because pinging enemies just to make sure turrets shoot them isn't a great use of your time. Part of it is because turret whip shots aren't good at hitting distant enemies, so pinging faraway bugs with Hawkeye isn't reliable. But really most of it is just that defender system does so much more damage than Hawkeye does. Remember that turrets keep shooting normally even when you're whipping them, so you don't want to neglect their normal damage output. Defender system is extra good with Gemini turrets, which also happen to pair well with turret whip. You've exclusively seen me using Gemini system in all these clips, and for good reason. But lazy, I hear you say. I don't like building 2 turrets. Well, the thing about that is, you can just build 1 turret normally, and only set up the second in situations where you want more support, like when a swarm is announced.
Swarm spotted. Buckle up. Contact imminent.
They're also more convenient when building 1 turret at a time than Mark II, because you can leapfrog them and never have to wait for your turret to fly back to you. Here's what I mean by that. Normally, if you build a Mark II turret and then later decide to move it, you need to recall it and wait for it to fly over to you or the new location.
The drill dozer is out of fuel.
But with Gemini, you can build the turret in the first location, and then later, when you decide to move, you can hold R to recall, then immediately place down the other turret. Turret 1 will continue flying back into your pocket, while you get to build turret 2 before it returns. Also, Gemini turrets have better ammo economy. At first glance, it looks like Gemini and Mark II are basically tied there. If you don't take the ammo upgrade, Mark II does 5,525 total damage, while Gemini does 5,665 total damage. If you do take the ammo upgrade, Mark II does 6,695 total damage, while Gemini does 6,655 total damage. The one in the lead changes, but either way it's a tiny margin and they're basically tied. However, when taking the same mods, Gemini is always doing a bit less damage per shot, spread out across more shots total. This means it's more efficient for killing weak enemies, like Swarmers, who die in 2 shots, plus Nadocytes and Brood Swarmers, which die in 1. Mark II's slightly higher damage doesn't change those breakpoints, so it's strictly less ammo efficient against them on top of clearing them slower. And Gemini's higher number of shots also frequently makes it more efficient at finishing off bugs you weaken with other tools as well. Long story short, definitely take Defender, probably take Gemini. Tiers 2 and 3 are pretty subjective, except Wide Mouth Port sucks and any build without quick deploy is a pain. This is my normal setup, but sometimes I switch to ammo on Escort or Salvage, and all of the Tier 3 mods are fine. Stunner is the first overclock we'll be looking at here. Part of the reason why is to circle back around to that killing grunts in 2 body shots thing. If you want to do that as consistently as possible without taking loaded shells, this overclock is the actual best way to do it, not the armor break mod. Though you shouldn't take this overclock for just that reason. Luckily, that's just a side benefit, and the real reason you take Stunner is improved time to kill on tougher targets as well as better CC. Stunning on any body part means you get stuns in more situations, and plus 30% damage against stunned targets helps chunk targets down. However, there are a few limitations. 1, it's just not that consistent. Stun chance on shotguns works like armor break does. Each pellet checks for stun individually instead of adding their chances together. As a result, it never reaches 100%. All pellets hitting the body is about a 59% chance to stun, which goes up to a 65% chance to stun with loaded shells. 2. You can't get the damage boost on the first shot since they need to be stunned. Something else can stun the target, of course, but that just means the first shot is coming from a different source. Secondaries can do this, and so can turrets, although turret stun isn't always reliable. And 3. Enemies with stun resists. This is kind of a big deal, unfortunately. Praetorians are one of the main use cases for improved single-target DPS, and they both get stunned for only 80% of normal stun duration, and they have a stun cooldown of 2 seconds. As a result, even max fire rate stunner Warthog mag dumping into a Praetorian loses some DPS and ammo efficiency, because the second mag dump happens during the stun cooldown. Then you have oppressors, dreadnoughts, and set spawns like Brood Nexi, Breeders, and Spitballers, all of which are totally immune to stun, and therefore immune to both the better CC and the damage boost of Stunner. Nonetheless, this is a standout among clean overclocks, and on most missions you can get good value from it. There is another overclock that gives a 30% damage boost, although you're going to need to get good and hit those weak points. Magnetic Pellet alignment increases weak point bonus damage by 30%, and also has the same 0.5x base spread effect as Choke does, except way more convenient because you still get to take either ammo or loaded shells. Those are two really nice upsides bundled together, and the downside is lowered rate of fire. But by how much? I need you to pay attention here, this part is important. Looking at the stat screen for MPA makes it look like this overclock cuts your rate of fire nearly in half. This is a visual bug with the stat screen. The actual rate of fire decrease MPA applies is only minus 25%, but the stat screen incorrectly applies the 0.75x rate of fire multiplier twice, and then rounds up, resulting in what looks like around minus 44% rate of fire. Take it on a mission and you'll find the rate of fire penalty isn't actually that bad. MPA provides a slight DPS increase, but more significantly makes it easier to hit one-shots and extends your effective range by a lot. Taking ammo with it is reasonable, but I will always be a loaded shells fan on MPA, because I love popping grunt heads and it's the single best Warthog build at doing that. It also allows you to one-shot slashers and Mactera spawn, neither of which are possible with any other Warthog setup. Using Choke and MPA for 25% base spread is kind of funny, but it's accuracy overkill and definitely worse than loaded shells MPA. Also, if you noticed that bit of text when I was talking about Choke's accuracy earlier, mentioning how movement accuracy penalties displace the aim of your shots rather than making the pellet spread get wider, this is the setup where that's most noticeable. You can see how, when I shoot Choke MPA Hog while sprinting, the groupings are still really tight, they just get displaced. But in practical terms, you might as well still consider Warthog spread to be base spread plus movement penalties, because that's still how far the pellets can go from where you're aiming. The last of the damage boosting overclocks is Cycle Overload, which is also the most unga bunga one. In exchange for 50% more base spread and plus 0.5 seconds of reload time, you get an okay plus 1 damage and a huge plus 2 rate of fire. Depending on your mod setup, this rate of fire increase is anywhere from a 57.14% to a 100% burst DPS boost. As a result, this OC enables higher single target DPS than any other Warthog OC, which is a great combination with secondaries that are good at clearing swarms. A typical setup looks like this, but if you're okay with dropping some of that DPS, here's an easier to control version that still has pretty good burst. The other unstable is on the opposite end of the spectrum. Minishells gives plus 78 max ammo and plus 6 mag size, so plus 84 ammo in total, and minus 50% recoil. In exchange, a hefty minus 2 damage per pellet, and you can't stun enemies. Now, if I was to follow my heart here, I would tell you that Minishells is cringe and bad and you shouldn't use it. Truthfully, though, it's totally fine. But it seems like a lot of people consider it incredibly good, which is definitely giving it too much credit. Aside from how, as already mentioned, improving your ammo economy has diminishing returns, minus 2 damage per pellet basically forces you to take loaded shells if you don't want your damage to be truly terrible. The total damage is slightly better with it anyways, and even with loaded shells, you still have a bit less damage per shot than a base Warthog. As a result, you need basically a perfect meat shot to one-shot a grunt. If even 2 pellets hit the grunt's body instead of its face, it fails. Of course, a grunt with a sliver of HP left can get finished off by a turret, some form of AoE, or even a pickaxe hit, but you're spending either a different ammo source or time in any of those cases, not to mention taking on more risk. And it's not like you always have backup in shooting a grunt, so frequently you end up just spending an extra shot to kill them when normally it would just take one, and that makes the ammo economy worse than it looks. You can just give up on one-shotting grunts altogether, but putting aside how that makes me feel like I'm giving up in general, it's also just settling for mediocre damage output and bad ammo economy. Also, since you're basically forced into taking loaded shells, you don't have the option of getting plus 42 ammo from the ammo mod. So it's not really like you get plus 84 ammo. Compared to a normal Warthog build that takes the ammo mod, you're basically gaining plus 42 ammo, plus better mag size and recoil. And that is still good, but you need to be aware that this thing comes with some caveats. But there's another overclock that gives ammo, the very unassuming clean, lightweight magazines. It's just a simple plus 18 max ammo and minus 0.4 seconds reload time OC. Since it doesn't have a damage penalty, it's of course free to take loaded shells if it wants, but if you'd like to compete with Minishells, taking the ammo mod actually puts you at very similar numbers in terms of total damage, 10,112 compared to 10,800. Only a little less total damage, except your damage per shot is better, so you can one-shot grunts more reliably, your burst DPS is a bit better, and you're still able to stun enemies. You're better at keeping yourself safe in general. You don't get the bigger magazine size, but it's not a big deal with how fast you can reload. It's an unconventional pick, but for my money, this is the actual best Warthog setup if you want to go for a big ammo pool.